shattered glass on hot asphalt. That was the last thing Officer Richard Hayes thought he would ever have to worry about when he pulled over a lone black woman on a desolate, unlit stretch of County Road 9. He figured he held all the cards, a shiny tin badge, a loaded sidearm, and absolute authority under the cover of darkness. He violently ripped her phone from her trembling hands and crushed it under his heavy tactical boot, grinning as he silenced what he assumed was just another helpless civilian trying to record him. He didn't realize the device's Bluetooth was still actively paired to her dashboard, and when the first name flashed in bright letters across her car's infotainment screen, his smug smile vanished and his blood ran entirely cold. The dashboard clock in the cruiser glowed a harsh neon green, 11:42 p.m. Officer Richard Hayes drummed his thick fingers against the steering wheel, his jaw set in a permanent, bitter scowl. It had been a dreadfully slow Tuesday night in the affluent, sprawling suburbs of Oak Ridge. For a man who thrived on the rush of authority, a quiet shift was a form of psychological torture. Hayes was a 12-year veteran of the department, a man who viewed his patrol sector not as a community to protect, but as a personal kingdom to rule. His personnel file downtown was a thick, heavily redacted stack of excessive force complaints, civilian grievances, and allegations of racial profiling. Yet, thanks to a deeply entrenched network of police union favors and a perpetually lenient internal affairs department, he remained behind the wheel of a patrol car, armed and unaccountable. 2 miles down the road, Sarah Jenkins was simply trying to get home. She drove a sleek, unassuming 2022 Honda Accord, listening to a low-volume jazz playlist to decompress from a brutal 14-hour workday. Sarah was a 32-year-old woman with a sharp mind and an even sharper resolve. She didn't wear a uniform, but she held more power in her tailored blazer than Hayes did in his entire armory. Sarah was the newly appointed Chief Legal Counsel for the state's Independent Police Oversight Commission, a special task force created by the governor specifically to audit and dismantle corrupt police precincts. Her face wasn't in the newspapers yet. Her appointment was going to be officially announced at a press conference the following Friday. Tonight, she was just an exhausted woman craving a hot shower and her comfortable bed. As Sarah's vehicle smoothly navigated the curve of County Road 9, a strictly residential bypass that skirted the edge of the city limits, Hayes's cruiser sat idling behind a thick cluster of weeping willows. The moment Sarah's headlights swept past his hiding spot, Hayes's predatory instincts kicked in. He couldn't see the driver clearly, but he could see the silhouette. A lone driver late at night in a neighborhood where he felt he got to decide who belonged and who didn't. Hayes flipped his headlights on and pulled out onto the road, aggressively accelerating until he was riding mere inches from Sarah's rear bumper. Sarah glanced in her rearview mirror. Her heart gave a slight involuntary flutter, a universal human reaction to a police cruiser tailgating in the dead of night. She checked her speedometer. She was going exactly 40 miles per hour in a 45 zone. Both hands were firmly at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel. Her tags were up to date. Her taillights were fully functional. There was absolutely no legal pretext for a stop. "Just pass me," Sarah whispered to the empty car, tapping her brakes lightly to disable cruise control. Instead of passing, the cruiser's overhead light bar erupted into a blinding, strobing frenzy of red and blue. The piercing chirp of the siren shattered the quiet night. Sarah let out a heavy sigh, signaling and pulling over safely onto the wide gravel shoulder. She put the car in park, turned on her interior dome light, rolled down her window, and placed both of her hands flat and visible on the top of the steering wheel. She knew the drill. In her line of work, she had reviewed hundreds of hours of dash-cam footage, where minor traffic stops escalated into fatal tragedies. She was prepared, but the knot of anxiety in her stomach was undeniable. Hayes took his time getting out of the cruiser. This was part of his routine, the psychological theater of the stop. He unclipped the retention strap on his holster, resting his right hand casually near the grip of his service weapon. He walked with a slow, exaggerated swagger, his heavy boots crunching loudly against the loose gravel. He stopped just behind her B-pillar, shining a high-lumen maglite directly into her eyes, effectively blinding her. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Hayes barked, his voice laced with unearned hostility. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't state his name. Sarah squinted against the blinding beam. "Good evening, officer. My license is in my purse on the passenger seat, and my registration is in the glove compartment. I am going to reach for them now. Is that all right?" "I said, give me your ID," Hayes snapped, interpreting her calm, procedural communication as defiance. He leaned in closer, the smell of stale coffee and stale chewing tobacco wafting into the car. "And stop moving so much." "I haven't moved at all, officer," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady, though her pulse was hammering against her ribs. She slowly reached over, keeping her movements telegraphed and deliberate, and retrieved the documents. She handed them out the window. Hayes snatched the cards from her hand. He shined the flashlight onto her driver's license, reading the name, Sarah Jenkins. He looked back at her face, his lip curling into a sneer. "You're a long way from the city, Sarah," he said, deliberately using her first name to establish dominance. "What are you doing out here in Oak Ridge at midnight?" "I'm driving home from work, officer," Sarah answered. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" "You drifted over the double yellow line back there." Hayes lied smoothly. It was his go-to excuse. It was nearly impossible to disprove in court without a secondary camera angle, and it gave him infinite probable cause. "Looked like you might be driving under the influence." "Have you been drinking tonight?" "No, sir, I don't drink," Sarah said firmly. "And I did not cross the double yellow line. My car has a lane departure warning system. It would have alerted me." Hayes's eyes narrowed. He absolutely despised citizens who talked back. He despised it even more when they sounded educated and confident. "Are you calling me a liar, girl?" The derogatory term hit the air like a physical strike. Sarah's grip on the steering wheel tightened until her knuckles turned white. Her professional veneer threatened to crack, but her legal training held her steady. She knew exactly what he was doing. He was fishing for a reaction. He wanted her to raise her voice. He wanted her to get angry so he could justify pulling her out of the vehicle. "I am simply stating a fact about my vehicle's capabilities," Sarah replied, her tone icy and precise. Sensing that his intimidation tactics weren't working as intended, Hayes decided to escalate. "Step out of the vehicle." "For a traffic violation?" Sarah asked. "I don't believe that's necessary. If you're going to write me a citation for crossing the line, please just write it so I can go home. I am giving you a lawful order." Hayes shouted, stepping back and resting his hand aggressively on his gun belt. "Step out of the damn car now. You are officially interfering with a police investigation." Sarah knew Pennsylvania v. Mims gave officers the right to order drivers out of the car during a lawful stop. She knew she had to comply to avoid a physical altercation, but she also knew she needed to protect herself. "I am stepping out of the car," Sarah said loudly, "but I am reaching for my phone first. I have a constitutional right to record this interaction for my own safety." With a swift motion, Sarah picked up her iPhone from the center console. She swiped left on the lock screen, immediately launching the camera app, and hit the red record button. She held the phone up, pointing the lens squarely at Hayes's aggressive, flushed face as she pushed her door open and stepped out into the chilly night air. The glowing screen of the smartphone reflected against Hayes's furious face. The red recording dot in the corner was a direct threat to his authority. A digital witness he could not intimidate. In Hayes's mind, a camera in the hands of a civilian was worse than a weapon. It was accountability, and accountability was the one thing he feared most. "Put that phone down," Hayes demanded, pointing a thick, calloused finger at her face. "You do not have my permission to record me." "I don't need your permission, officer," Sarah said. Her voice was remarkably steady, betraying none of the terror she felt. "We are in a public space, on a public roadway. I am exercising my First Amendment right to record police activity. Please state your name and badge number for the record." Hayes took a step forward, closing the distance between them, until he was invading her personal space, looming over her. "I'm telling you for the last time, put the phone down, or I will arrest you for obstruction of justice and wiretapping." The state wiretapping law requires a reasonable expectation of privacy, which does not apply to a police officer conducting official duties on a public highway. Sarah fired back, reciting the case law flawlessly. "I am remaining completely peaceful. I am not interfering with your duties. I am simply documenting this encounter." Her legal knowledge was the absolute wrong thing to deploy against a man like Richard Hayes. It was like pouring gasoline on an open flame. His face turned a deep, mottled shade of crimson. He wasn't used to being challenged with facts. He was used to fear, compliance, and submission. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Hayes growled, his voice dropping an octave into something dark and menacing. "You think you can come out here into my town and recite a bunch of legal mumbo-jumbo to me?" Before Sarah could even formulate a response, Hayes lunged. He didn't announce an arrest. He didn't try to grab her arm to detain her. He went straight for the device. With a sudden, violent swipe of his hand, he struck Sarah's wrist hard. The sharp pain caused her fingers to involuntarily open. "Hey," Sarah yelled, stepping back in shock. The iPhone flew from her grasp, tumbling through the air before hitting the rough asphalt with a sickening clack. Hayes looked down at the phone. It had landed face up. The screen was cracked, but the recording was still clearly running, capturing the dark sky and his looming silhouette. A dark, malicious smirk spread across his face. "Oops," Hayes said, mocking her. "Looks like you dropped it." Then, with deliberate, calculated cruelty, Hayes lifted his right foot and brought the heel of his heavy police issue boot down directly onto the center of the phone. Crunch. The sound of shattering glass and snapping plastic echoed loudly in the quiet night. But he wasn't finished. He lifted his boot and stomped down a second time, grinding his heel into the device, ensuring total destruction. The screen completely shattered into a spiderweb of dead, black pixels and jagged shards of glass. The metal casing bent awkwardly. The device was effectively pulverized into electronic dust. Sarah stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat. The sheer, unprovoked violence of the act left her temporarily stunned. She looked from the mangled remains of her $1,000 phone up to the smug, triumphant face of the officer. "Well, that's a shame," Hayes said, kicking the ruined phone lightly with the toe of his boot so it skidded into the dirt off the shoulder. "Now it seems to me like you've got a broken taillight too." He walked to the back of her Honda Accord and, with a swift, powerful kick, shattered the red plastic casing of her right taillight. "What are you doing?" Sarah cried out, finally finding her voice. "Are you insane? I'm reporting you. I will have your badge for this." Hayes laughed, a deep, ugly sound. He casually unclipped a small citation book from his belt and leaned against the trunk of her car, scribbling furiously in the dark. Who are you going to tell, sweetheart? Hayes sneered without looking up. You going to call the cops? I am the cops. You think anyone downtown is going to believe some aggressive, uncooperative driver over a decorated 12-year veteran? It's your word against mine. And you don't have a camera anymore. He tore the yellow carbon copy from the pad and shoved it aggressively against Sarah's chest. She had to step back to avoid him touching her, the paper fluttering to the ground. That's a citation for failure to maintain your lane, and a fix-it ticket for the broken taillight, Hayes said, his voice dripping with condescension. I'm letting you off with a warning for resisting arrest, because I'm a nice guy. Now get back in your car, turn around, and drive back to whatever city you crawled out of. If I see you in Oak Ridge again, we're going to have a real problem. Hayes turned his back on her, fully confident that he had broken her spirit. He swaggered back to his patrol car, his ego inflated, relishing the adrenaline high of unchecked dominance. He climbed into the driver's seat, pulled the door shut, and reached for the gear shift, ready to peel out and leave her in the dust, stranded with a broken phone and a vandalized car. He had won. He always won. The system was built to ensure it. Or so he thought. Sarah didn't move to pick up the ticket. She stood perfectly still on the side of the road, the night wind whipping around her legs. She was shaking, but it was no longer from fear. It was pure, unadulterated, blinding rage. She took deep breaths, forcing the clinical, analytical part of her brain to take over. She watched Hayes's cruiser sitting there, the officer likely finishing his notes before driving away. She turned her attention to her car. The driver's side door was still wide open. Her keys were still in the ignition, and the car's auxiliary battery was still engaged, powering the interior electronics. On the dirt shoulder, 10 feet away, lay the completely mangled corpse of her iPhone. The screen was annihilated. The chassis was bent like a taco. But what Officer Richard Hayes didn't understand about modern technology was that while a screen can be shattered into a million pieces, the solid-state motherboard, the battery core, and the microscopic Bluetooth antenna housed deep within the aluminum frame were surprisingly resilient. The phone was blind, deaf, and crippled, but it wasn't dead. It was still powered on, and it was still deeply integrated with the Apple CarPlay system of her 2022 Honda Accord. Inside the cruiser, Hayes was just about to shift into drive when a sudden, jarring sound cut through the silence. It wasn't coming from his police radio. It was coming from outside. It was a loud, upbeat marimba ringtone. The sound was incredibly clear, amplified, and booming through the open door of the Honda Accord, utilizing the vehicle's premium 8-speaker surround sound system. Hayes froze. His hand hovered over the gear shift. He looked out his window. The black woman was still standing exactly where he had left her, nowhere near her car's dashboard. She wasn't holding a phone. She was just staring at him, her expression a mask of chilling composure. The ringtone continued to blare into the night. Brr-ring, brr-ring. Hayes felt a sudden, inexplicable tightening in his chest. A prickle of unease washed over his previously triumphant mood. He opened his cruiser door and stepped out, one foot on the asphalt, listening intently. The sound was definitely coming from her car. Sarah slowly turned her head, looking at the glowing 12-inch infotainment display situated in the center console of her dashboard. It was brightly illuminated, casting a soft white light into the dark cabin. Hayes took a few steps forward, drawn by a sudden, sickening curiosity. As he got closer to her vehicle, the text on the large dashboard screen became legible. His eyes focused on the bold, high-definition letters flashing across the display. Incoming call. Chief Robert Langdon, Oakhaven Police Department, direct. Cecil Hayes stopped dead in his tracks. The breath was completely sucked out of his lungs. His boots felt like they were suddenly made of lead. Chief Robert Langdon, the man who ran the entire Metropolitan Tri-County police force, the man who could fire Hayes with a single phone call, the man who was universally feared and respected by every cop in a 50-mile radius. Why the hell was the chief of police calling this random woman's cell phone at 10 minutes to midnight? The phone continued to ring through the car speakers. Each chime sounded like a death knell to Hayes's career. Sarah didn't look at Hayes. She calmly walked over to her open car door. She didn't reach for the smashed phone in the dirt. She didn't have to. She simply leaned into the car and pressed the large green accept icon directly on the dashboard touchscreen. The ringtone cut off instantly, replaced by a crisp, clear voice echoing through the car's premium audio system. The Bluetooth microphone housed in the car's headliner picked up every sound. "Sarah, are you there? It's Robert." The voice was unmistakable. It was the gravelly, authoritative baritone of Chief Langdon. Hayes had heard that voice dress down entire platoons of officers at morning roll call. Hearing it now, broadcasting out of the very car he had just illegally vandalized, sent a wave of absolute nausea crashing through Hayes's stomach. "I'm here, Robert," Sarah replied clearly, speaking toward the roof of her car. "Thank God," Chief Langdon's voice boomed through the speakers. "Listen, I'm sitting here in the mayor's office with Thomas. We've been going over your final draft for the City Oversight Commission's restructuring plan. Thomas wants to know if you can fast-track the termination protocols for repeat offenders. Are you almost home? Can you jump on a secure Zoom link?" Hayes felt his knees actually buckle. He reached out and grabbed the edge of Sarah's open car door to steady himself. Thomas, Mayor Thomas Sterling, City Oversight Commission, termination protocols. The puzzle pieces snapped together in Hayes's brain with terrifying clarity. He hadn't just pulled over a citizen. He had pulled over the architect of the Police Reform Task Force. He had just assaulted, threatened, and vandalized the property of a woman who was actively on a midnight conference call with the chief of police and the mayor of the city. "Actually, Robert," Sarah said, her voice dripping with lethal calmness, "I'm going to be a little delayed. I'm currently pulled over on County Road 9. Pulled over. The chief's voice shifted instantly from friendly to sharp. Professional concern. "Is everything all right? Did your car break down?" Sarah slowly turned her head and locked eyes with Officer Hayes. The look she gave him was devoid of anger now. It was the look an exterminator gives a cockroach before stepping on it. "No, my car was fine," Sarah said into the microphone. "I was stopped by an Oak Ridge patrol officer, badge number 4892. He stated I crossed a double yellow line, which is factually incorrect. When I attempted to exercise my First Amendment right to record the interaction, the officer physically assaulted me, snatched my iPhone from my hand, and repeatedly stomped on it until it was destroyed. He then proceeded to kick in my right taillight and issued me a citation for resisting arrest." Dead silence fell over the car speakers. The only sound was the rustling of the wind through the weeping willows and the heavy, panicked breathing of Officer Hayes. Hayes tried to speak. He tried to formulate a defense, an excuse, a lie, anything, but his throat had constricted so tightly he couldn't push a single word out. The swagger was gone. The predator was gone. He was nothing but a trapped animal staring down the barrel of total ruin. "Sarah." The chief's voice was dangerously low when it finally returned. The warmth was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying fury. "Are you injured?" "I have a bruised wrist, but I am physically okay," Sarah replied. "However, my device is completely destroyed. It's currently lying in the dirt. It's a miracle the Bluetooth motherboard hasn't failed yet." And the officer, Chief Langdon demanded. "Is he still there?" Sarah looked right at Hayes, who was now trembling visibly, his hand white-knuckling the car door. "Yes," Sarah said. "He's standing right next to me, listening to every word." "Put him on," Langdon ordered. It wasn't a request. It was an executioner's command. Sarah gestured gracefully toward the dashboard, stepping back to give Hayes room. "He wants to speak with you, officer." Hayes stared at the dashboard screen. The name Chief Robert Langdon seemed to burn brightly, searing itself into his retinas. He slowly leaned his head into the car cabin, feeling like he was placing his head directly onto a chopping block. "Chief Langdon?" Hayes stammered, his voice cracking pitifully. "Sir, it's Officer Hayes. There's been a massive misunderstanding here, sir. The suspect, the driver, she was non-compliant." "Shut your damn mouth, Hayes." Langdon roared through the speakers, the volume so loud it actually startled the night birds in the nearby trees. "Do not say another word. You do not speak. You listen." Hayes clamped his mouth shut, swallowing hard against the bile rising in his throat. "I know exactly who you are, Hayes," Langdon continued, his voice shaking with rage. "I have your bloated, disgusting personnel file sitting on my desk right now. We were literally discussing how to legally terminate you without the union throwing a tantrum, and you just handed it to me on a silver platter. You just assaulted the director of the State Police Oversight Commission." Hayes closed his eyes. The world was spinning. Director. He had destroyed the phone of the director. "Here is what is going to happen right now," Chief Langdon barked, articulating every word with venomous precision. "You are going to take your hands off Ms. Jenkins' vehicle. You are going to step back. You are going to stand at attention in front of your cruiser. You will not move. You will not touch your radio. You will not touch your weapon. I am dispatching Captain Miller from Internal Affairs and 2 state trooper units to your exact GPS location right now." "Sir, please," Hayes whimpered, tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. He had a mortgage. He had a pension on the line. "I said do not speak." Langdon screamed. "When Captain Miller arrives, you will surrender your badge and your service weapon immediately. You are stripped of your police powers effective this exact second. You are going to be arrested, Hayes. You are going to be booked into the county jail for assault under color of law, destruction of evidence, and destruction of private property. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Hayes whispered, the fight completely drained from his body. He felt sick. He felt small. The badge on his chest suddenly felt like a heavy anchor, dragging him straight to the bottom of the ocean. "Sarah, I am staying on the line with you until units arrive." Langdon's voice shifted back to her, protective and calm. "Do not let him near you." "I'm perfectly fine, Robert," Sarah said, crossing her arms and leaning against the side of her car. She looked at Hayes, who was now slowly backing away, his face pale as a ghost, walking backwards toward his cruiser like a beaten dog. Hayes reached his patrol car and stood rigidly in front of the grille, illuminated by his own strobe lights. The irony was suffocating. The lights he had used to intimidate and trap his prey were now spotlighting his own demise. He looked down at his heavy boots, the same boots he had just used to crush her phone, thinking he was destroying the evidence. He hadn't destroyed the evidence. He had activated his own trap door. The distant, high-pitched wail of multiple sirens began to echo through the valley, growing louder and closer with every passing second. The cavalry was coming, and they weren't coming for the black woman on the side of the road. They were coming for him. The wail of the sirens morphed from a distant, haunting echo into a deafening, physical vibration that shook the pavement of County Road 9. Officer Richard Hayes stood paralyzed against the front grille of his Ford Explorer Interceptor. The strobing red and blue lights of his own light bar washed over his pale, sweating face, but they were soon overpowered by a blinding wave of incoming high beams. First to arrive were two heavily decaled Pennsylvania State Police cruisers, coming in hot from opposite directions to effectively barricade the roadway. They didn't park with casual authority. They parked tactically, angling their heavy vehicles to block any potential avenue of escape. 4 state troopers, clad in crisp gray uniforms and wide-brimmed campaign hats, stepped out simultaneously. Their hands were instinctively resting on their duty belts. They had received a Priority 1 dispatch directly from the Chief of Police. Officer involved in active assault against a high-level state official. Suspect is armed and currently considered unstable. They didn't look at Hayes as a brother in blue. They looked at him as a threat. Officer Hayes, keep your hands where we can see them. Do not move, the lead trooper shouted, his voice cutting through the chaotic noise of the sirens. Hayes didn't dare breathe, let alone move. He raised his trembling hands to shoulder height, palms facing outward. The absolute humiliation of the moment began to suffocate him. He was being treated like a common street criminal by men who, just yesterday, would have nodded to him at a local diner. Seconds later, a sleek, unmarked black Chevy Tahoe screeched to a halt behind the state troopers. The driver's door flew open, and Captain David Miller stepped out. Miller was the head of internal affairs for the Tri-County area, a ruthless, analytical man who wore tailored charcoal suits and possessed a terrifyingly quiet demeanor. He was universally despised by dirty cops and feared by everyone else. Miller bypassed Hayes entirely and walked straight over to the 2022 Honda Accord. Sarah Jenkins was still leaning against her car, watching the scene unfold with the cold, detached observation of a seasoned prosecutor building a timeline. "Mrs. Jenkins," Captain Miller said, extending a hand. His tone was deferential, a stark contrast to the barking aggression Hayes had used just 20 minutes prior. "I'm Captain Miller, Internal Affairs. Chief Langdon sent me. Are you physically unharmed?" "I am fine, Captain. Just a bit of localized swelling on my right wrist where he struck me," Sarah replied, shaking his hand firmly. She gestured down to the dirt shoulder. "My primary concern is the preservation of evidence. My phone is right there. It contains the initial audio and video of the stop before he destroyed it." Miller looked down at the pulverized iPhone, its casing bent and screen shattered into fine dust. His jaw tightened. He pulled a pair of blue nitrile gloves from his pocket, snapped them on, and carefully retrieved the mangled device, placing it into a static-proof evidence bag. "We have state cyber forensics on standby," Miller assured her. "If the motherboard is intact, they will extract the file. But frankly, Ms. Jenkins, we likely won't even need it. We have your testimony, the chief's testimony from the live call, and the physical evidence of your vehicle." He gestured toward the shattered red plastic of her taillight. Miller turned on his heel. The professional courtesy vanished from his face, replaced by a mask of bureaucratic wrath. He walked slowly toward Hayes, the gravel crunching under his dress shoes. "Captain Miller, please," Hayes pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. She was erratic. She was refusing lawful orders. I felt threatened. "Shut your mouth, Richard," Miller said, his voice dangerously soft. He stopped 2 feet from Hayes. "Turn around. Put your hands flat on the hood of your cruiser." "Captain, I'm a 12-year veteran. You can't do this without my union rep present." Hayes stammered, desperation clawing at his throat. "I can and I am," Miller replied coldly. "You are not being questioned. You are being detained. Turn around, or the troopers will assist you to the ground." The 4 state troopers took a collective, heavy step forward. Hayes swallowed hard, tears of sheer panic finally spilling over his eyelashes. He slowly turned around and placed his palms on the warm metal of his patrol car hood. Miller stepped up behind him. With practiced humiliating efficiency, the IA captain unclipped Hayes's duty belt. The heavy leather rig, containing his Glock 19, his taser, his pepper spray, and his handcuffs, dropped to the asphalt with a heavy, metallic clatter. It was the sound of a kingdom falling. The authority Hayes had wielded like a blunt instrument was physically stripped away in an instant. Richard Hayes, Miller recited mechanically, pulling a fresh pair of steel handcuffs from his own belt. You are under arrest for aggravated assault, official oppression, tampering with physical evidence, and criminal mischief. You have the right to remain silent. The cold steel clamped down brutally tight around Hayes's wrists. Click, click, click. As Miller read him his Miranda rights, Hayes was roughly turned around. He looked past the flashing lights and locked eyes with Sarah Jenkins one last time. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't smiling. She was simply watching the system work exactly the way she had designed it to. A state trooper grabbed Hayes by the bicep, shoved his head down, and forced him into the cage of the state cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing Hayes in the claustrophobic, plastic-lined back seat. There were no door handles on the inside. The air conditioning was off. It smelled like stale sweat and despair. He was no longer the apex predator of County Road 9. He was just another inmate in the system, trapped in the dark. The booking process at the county lockup was a masterclass in psychological degradation, especially for a former cop. Every deputy, every intake officer, every corrections guard knew exactly who Hayes was. They had all received the memo. There was no professional courtesy extended, no thin blue line solidarity. The chief of police had personally ordered the arrest of a man who assaulted the state's top police oversight official. To show Hayes an ounce of sympathy was to commit career suicide. Hayes was stripped of his uniform, ordered to shower under freezing water, and handed a faded, scratchy orange jumpsuit. His mugshot was taken under harsh fluorescent lights, his eyes red and swollen from crying, his face puffy, his arrogant sneer entirely gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a broken man. At 3 a.m., Hayes sat shivering in a cinder-block interrogation room. The heavy steel door finally opened, and Bill Peterson walked in. Peterson was the senior representative for the Oak Ridge Police Benevolent Association, a bulldog of a lawyer who had successfully shielded Hayes from 3 excessive force lawsuits in the past. When Hayes saw him, a desperate, pathetic spark of hope ignited in his chest. "Bill!" "Oh, thank God!" Hayes gasped, leaning forward against his handcuffs, which were chained to the metal table. "Bill, you gotta get me out of here." Miller went rogue. "They ambushed me. It was a routine traffic stop. She got combative. I had to use minimal force to secure the scene." Peterson didn't sit down. He didn't open his briefcase. He just stood near the door, staring at Hayes with an expression of profound, disgusted disbelief. "Minimal force," Peterson repeated flatly. He tossed a thin manila folder onto the metal table. It slid across and hit Hayes's chained hands. "Did you even read the name on her driver's license, Ricky? Or were you too busy playing God in the dark?" "Her name was Sarah Jenkins," Hayes said, confused by Peterson's coldness. "Just some corporate lawyer from the city. She thought she knew the law. She pulled out her phone." "She doesn't just know the law, you absolute moron," Peterson snapped, his face flushing red with anger. "Sarah Jenkins is the newly appointed Chief Legal Counsel for the Governor's Independent Police Oversight Commission. She is literally the woman the state hired to fire cops like you. She was on a live, hands-free phone call with Mayor Sterling and Chief Langdon when you assaulted her. They heard everything." Hayes felt the blood drain completely from his face. The room spun. They heard. And that's not even the worst part, Peterson continued, his voice dropping into a harsh whisper. You thought you were a genius, stomping on her phone. You thought there were no cameras. Did you forget that the department upgraded the dashcam systems in the Explorers last month? The light bar activates the camera. Hayes mumbled automatically, reciting the manual. But I stepped out of frame. We were at the side of her car. The camera couldn't see us. It couldn't see you, Peterson agreed grimly. But the new systems have dual-channel, high-gain parabolic microphones synced to the camera's hard drive. It picked up every single word. It picked up the sound of you striking her. It picked up the crunch of her phone under your boot. It picked up the sound of you shattering her taillight. Internal Affairs has a 4K audio recording of you committing 4 distinct felonies. Hayes stared at the manila folder. He felt physically ill. The walls of the interrogation room seemed to be closing in, pressing the oxygen out of his lungs. So, what's the play, Bill? Hayes whispered, his voice trembling. Administrative leave? A 6-month suspension? I can take a demotion to the desk. Peterson let out a dry, humorless laugh. He picked up his briefcase. There is no play, Ricky. The union is officially withdrawing your legal representation. Your actions fall completely outside the scope of your official duties. We are not spending a dime of union dues to defend a rogue officer who assaulted a state official on tape. You're fired. Langdon signed the termination paperwork an hour ago. You're on your own. I highly suggest you call a public defender. Peterson turned around, knocked twice on the heavy steel door, and walked out, leaving Hayes entirely alone in the deafening silence of the lockup. By sunrise, the story had exploded. Hayes sat in a holding cell, staring blankly at a small cage television mounted in the corner. Every local news station and a few national syndicates were running the same breaking news banner. Rogue cop, arrest in late night, attack on state official. The broadcast cut to a live feed from the steps of City Hall. Mayor Thomas Sterling stood at the podium, looking furious. To his right stood Chief Robert Langdon in full dress uniform. To his left, looking sharp, composed, and utterly untouchable in a navy blue suit, stood Sarah Jenkins. The actions of Richard Hayes do not represent the Oak Ridge Police Department. Mayor Sterling thundered into the microphones. They represent a systemic arrogance that we are entirely committed to eradicating. To prove our dedication to transparency, we are pushing forward the announcement of our new Chief Legal Counsel for the Oversight Commission, Ms. Sarah Jenkins. She experienced this corruption firsthand last night, and she will be the one leading the charge to ensure it never happens again. Sarah stepped up to the microphone. The camera zoomed in on her face. Her expression was calm, resolute, and piercing. Accountability is not an option. It is a mandate, Sarah said clearly, her voice echoing out of the tiny TV speaker and echoing in Hayes's empty cell. No badge grants you the right to act as an executioner of the law on the side of a dark road. We will dismantle the culture of intimidation, brick by brick. Hayes put his head between his knees and finally began to sob. He hadn't just crossed the wrong woman. He had accidentally kick-started the very crusade that was going to destroy him. The wheels of justice, usually famously slow and bureaucratic, moved with terrifying, breakneck speed when the victim was a high-ranking state lawyer and the evidence was a pristine audio recording, backed by the chief of police. Richard Hayes was denied bail. The district attorney, sensing a massive political win and eager to align himself with the new Oversight Commission, threw the absolute maximum weight of the penal code at him. Hayes was formally indicted by a grand jury within 2 weeks. The trial was a bloodbath. Hayes's overworked public defender tried to argue that Hayes had experienced a momentary lapse in judgment due to occupational stress, but the argument evaporated the moment. The prosecution played the dashcam audio for the jury. The clear, malicious cruelty in Hayes's voice as he mocked Sarah, followed by the violent crunching of the phone and the shattering of the taillight, echoed through the quiet courtroom. Sarah Jenkins took the stand on the third day. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't show anger. She simply laid out the chronological facts of the assault with devastating, clinical precision. The jury watched her, spellbound by her professionalism, and then looked at Hayes, who sat slumped at the defense table, looking bloated, defeated, and pathetic in an ill-fitting gray suit. After only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty on all counts: aggravated assault, official oppression, destruction of evidence, and criminal mischief. Furthermore, the Federal Department of Justice stepped in, hitting Hayes with a deprivation of rights under color of law conviction for explicitly violating Sarah's First Amendment right to record. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for police corruption, sentenced Hayes to 8 years in a state penitentiary to be served consecutively. But the criminal trial was only the first hammer blow. Sarah Jenkins wasn't just a prosecutor. She was a master of civil litigation. While Hayes was being transferred to a medium-security prison in the northern part of the state, Sarah filed a massive civil rights lawsuit against him personally. In 99% of police misconduct cases, officers are shielded from personal financial ruin by qualified immunity, a legal doctrine that protects government officials from civil suits unless they violated a clearly established statutory or constitutional right. Hayes's new civil attorney filed a motion to dismiss based on qualified immunity. Sarah Jenkins argued the motion herself in federal court. "Your Honor," Sarah argued smoothly, pacing before the judge, "the right of a citizen to record police activity in a public space is a clearly established First Amendment right in this circuit. Officer Hayes did not make a procedural error. He committed a malicious, intentional assault and destroyed private property to cover it up. Qualified immunity is meant to protect officers who make reasonable mistakes in dangerous situations. It is not a shield for petty tyrants throwing violent tantrums." The federal judge agreed entirely. In a landmark, 40-page ruling that sent shockwaves through police unions across the country, the judge stripped Richard Hayes of his qualified immunity. He was personally liable for the damages. The financial ruin was absolute. To satisfy the court-ordered restitution and the massive punitive damages awarded to Sarah, Hayes's assets were systematically liquidated. His state pension, the golden parachute he had spent 12 years building, was legally garnished and seized. His 2-story suburban home in Oak Ridge, the one he had proudly bought with overtime pay, was foreclosed upon and sold at auction. The strain was too much. 3 months into his prison sentence, Hayes's wife filed for divorce, taking full custody of their golden retriever and moving out of state to escape the sheer, suffocating humiliation of her newly destroyed surname. 3 years later, Richard Hayes sat in the humid, noisy cafeteria of the state penitentiary, wearing the same faded orange jumpsuit he had been booked in. He was eating a plate of bland, overcooked pasta, surrounded by men he used to arrest. He kept his head down, terrified to make eye contact with anyone. He had aged 20 years in 3. His hair was thinning and gray, his once imposing posture permanently hunched. He had lost his badge. He had lost his freedom. He had lost his home, his wife, his pension, and his pride. All because on one quiet Tuesday night, he couldn't resist the urge to break a phone that belonged to a woman who refused to bow to him. He took a bite of the tasteless food the memory of shattered glass on hot asphalt, haunting him like a ghost that would never, ever leave him in peace. 5 years is a fleeting moment for a soaring career, but an absolute eternity inside a state penitentiary. By the time the crisp autumn winds of 2029 swept through the Northeast, Sarah Jenkins had long since left the state capitol behind. Her masterclass in dismantling the corrupt underbelly of the Oak Ridge Police Department had caught the attention of Washington. She was now sitting behind a massive mahogany desk in a corner office in Washington, D.C., serving as the newly appointed Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. She had just spearheaded a national database, the National Police Decertification Index, a federal registry that permanently flagged fired officers, preventing them from simply moving 2 towns over and pinning on a new badge. She had turned the worst night of her life into a nationwide shield for millions. 400 miles away, in a grim, rain-soaked industrial park in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Richard Hayes was zipping up a frayed, second-hand jacket. Hayes had been released on early parole due to prison overcrowding, having served just over 5 years of his sentence. But freedom was a technicality. He was a 51-year-old convicted felon with no assets, no family, no pension, and a court-mandated restitution bill of $450,000 that hovered over him like a grim reaper. He lived in a cramped, mold-scented studio apartment above a bowling alley, surviving on cheap canned soup and bitter regrets. He was currently sitting in the harsh, fluorescent-lit waiting room of Apex Freight Logistics, clutching a battered clipboard. He was applying for a third-shift warehouse associate position, a minimum-wage job loading pallets into the back of frozen transport trucks. It was back-breaking, grueling work, but it was the only place that hadn't instantly thrown his application in the trash. "Richard Hayes," a voice called out. Hayes stood up, his knees popping, and walked into a small, cluttered office. The hiring manager, a young man named Kevin Hodges, who looked barely old enough to rent a car, gestured to a plastic chair. "Have a seat, Rick," Kevin said, typing quickly on his keyboard. "Your warehouse assessment scores look fine. Can lift 50 pounds, willing to work overnight. Just need to run the standard background check. Company policy, you know." "Yeah, I know," Hayes muttered, staring down at his scuffed boots. He had rehearsed his speech. "I made a mistake years ago. I paid my debt to society. I just want to put my head down and work." Kevin hit the enter key. The office went quiet, except for the hum of the computer fan. A few seconds later, Kevin stopped typing. He leaned closer to the monitor. A confused, slightly alarmed expression washed over his young face. He clicked something else, and a bright red flashing alert banner reflected off his glasses. "Mr. Hayes." Kevin started, his voice suddenly losing its casual friendliness. Were you a police officer?" Hayes's stomach dropped into a bottomless abyss. "A long time ago. Like I said on the application, I have a felony conviction, but I'm on parole. I'm cleared to work." "It's not just the felony," Kevin said, turning the monitor slightly so Hayes could see it. "Our new corporate HR software automatically cross-references the Federal Decertification Index. It says, here you have a Level 1 civil rights conviction. And wait, you're the guy. The dashcam guy." Hayes closed his eyes. Even here, 300 miles away in a grimy warehouse office, he couldn't outrun it. The video-audio of him mocking Sarah and crushing her phone had gone viral years ago, studied in criminal justice classes, and broadcasted on every true crime podcast in the country. "Look, kid," Hayes pleaded, his voice cracking with a pathetic desperation he couldn't hide. "I just need to load boxes. I need to pay my probation fees. Please." Kevin slowly shook his head, pulling Hayes's application from the tray and dropping it directly into the shredder bin under his desk. "I'm sorry, man. Corporate policy strictly prohibits hiring anyone flagged on the DOJ Civil Rights Registry. We have government logistics contracts. We'd lose our bonding instantly. I can't hire you. You need to leave." Hayes didn't argue. He didn't yell. The fight had been beaten out of him years ago. He stood up slowly, the phantom weight of a badge he would never wear again pressing down on his slumped shoulders. He walked out of the office, out of the warehouse, and into the freezing Scranton rain. He reached into his damp pocket and pulled out his phone to check the bus schedule. It was a cheap $30 prepaid burner phone. As he unlocked it, his thumb snagged on a jagged edge. He looked down. The cheap glass screen had a massive spiderweb crack running right down the center. He stared at the shattered glass, the freezing rain soaking through his jacket. In that quiet, miserable moment, the true weight of his karma finally settled over him. He had thought he was a king destroying a peasant's toy. But in stomping on that phone, he had shattered his own entire existence, leaving nothing but jagged, broken pieces he could never put back together. This story serves as a chilling real-world reminder that absolute power corrupts. Absolutely, but undeniable accountability is an unstoppable force. Officer Richard Hayes believed the darkness of County Road 9, and the weight of his badge made him a god, immune to the laws he swore to uphold. But he picked the wrong victim on the wrong night, in the wrong era of technology. Sarah Jenkins proved that staying calm, knowing your rights, and trusting the system you build can bring down even the most entrenched bullies. Karma didn't just knock on Hayes's door, it kicked it off the hinges and took his house. If this story of ultimate karma and justice hit hard, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a satisfying revenge story, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life drama. Let us know in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes?